Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I wanted to talk to you today about the state of amateur radio in 2017 and what the hobby looks like now compared to how it did in previous years. A lot of people say that the hobby is dying, and I wanted to just talk about that and hobefully get some interaction from you guys and see what your thoughts are on amateur radio today. So you don't have to look far to find pictures, websites and videos of how the hobby used to be, from bustling rallies in the 70s, 80s and 90s, 2 metre channels active most nights, most channels active with nets, conversations and stuff going on them. An abundance of groups setting up portable stations, experimenting on hilltops, talking to each other, building homebrew gear and fox hunting, and in the 1970s groups of young lads meeting up, building transmitters and then going to the local hilltop and testing them out. There's repeaters all over 2 metres and 70 centimetres that cover most villages, towns and cities in every county of the UK, an abundance of repeaters, and many of them have been on the air for decades. And there's still numerous radio clubs in most areas that still have members and hold meetups, some newer, some are long-standing clubs that have been around for decades that still have original members. And the thing you'll find is that a lot of these clubs, most of the members that go to a lot of these clubs, or certainly in my experience, don't ever go on the radio. And this is what I want to look at in this video and sort of establish why that is. So between 2010 and 2016, licence holder numbers have increased by 12,500 or just over. And if we actually look at the numbers, between 2010 and the end of 2016, club licences have gone up by 106. Foundation licences have gone up by 8,442. Intermediate licence holders have gone up by 3,669, and full licence holders have gone up by 296, which is a total of 12,513. So some really strong numbers and growing numbers, but can you trust these statistics? So where are these people now? There's obviously a difference between today's amateur radio hobby and that of years gone by. Where are these people now? So you go to rallies and attendance numbers on rallies seem to get smaller and smaller each time you go. Some rallies disappear. Landudno was a big rally that disappeared. Repeaters, especially around here, spend the day sat dormant, unused, apart from the odd call here and there. Some repeaters don't get used at all. 2 metres, some nights there's a few conversations on, but for the most part 2 metres sits dead with no activity whatsoever. And I live in Manchester, which is a busy area. There's a lot of towns that surround Manchester, and there's a lot of licensed amateurs in Manchester, and the bands are really quiet compared to how they used to be. So I only have to drive around my local area to see a glimpse into the past with amateur radio. You see many houses that have antennas on, collinears that have gone green after years of disuse and neglect, antennas that have broken down, antennas that are leaning to one side that have been for years, for decades, that have been damaged by the wind. You see collinears and things like that, white stick antennas with radials missing and the coax cut, again where they've not been used for many years. I actually spent a bit of time using call book data and plotted the stations in my area in a 2 mile radius on Google Earth, and I was quite surprised with what I saw. There was dozens upon dozens of stations in the local area with registered call signs, and when they were plotted on the map in this 2 mile radius from where I live, it was just unbelievable. There's tons of them. Now, I know these people were licensed across different decades and people have passed away, left the hobby and stuff, but surely you would expect to hear or see more of these people around, and you don't. I've only ever spoken to one person in that 2 mile radius. He was a G3 station that had left the hobby for many years, and came back on, had a quick chat, and then never heard from him again. So you've got to ask yourself why he left the hobby in the first place and why he appears to have left it again. So there's many stations in many areas. In fact, just over the back here, there's a large collinear on the roof of somebody's house, and there's a G7 station that's down as living there, but I've never heard him, never seen him, and that antenna looks like it hasn't been used or maintained in a long time. So statistics show us from Ofcom and the RSGB that around 300 to 700 amateur radio operators in the UK die every year. Now the RSGB silent key listings show around 300 a year on average, and that's just RSGB members only. So we can safely assume that between 300 and 700 amateurs die in the UK every year. But can we rely on statistics? A lot of amateur radio operators in the UK still hold two or three call signs. Full license holders, some of them still have the rights to their foundation and intermediate call signs. So there's a disparity in numbers there, because you've got, in a lot of cases, 3 call signs registered to one person. So some amateurs licensed pre-2002 in the Class A, AB and B era still hold the Class B and AB calls, even though they have a Class A call sign, and it's not really known how many people this applies to. So when the foundation licence was introduced around 2002, that allowed a lot of them onto HF, but some existing Class B holders weren't allowed to use the HF bands. So in the period between the foundation licence being introduced and the abolition of the Morse test in 2003, 3,600 or over 3,600 Class B holders took the foundation licence just to gain an M3 to allow them onto certain HF bands. And because at the time only a few M3 block call signs had been introduced, it allowed those Class B users to pick custom call signs and suffixes on the call signs and letters that they wanted, so they had sort of a custom call sign, which was more appealing to those users. So when we whittle out duplicates, how many actual call signs does that leave us with? How many amateurs does that leave us with in the UK? We've got people with duplicate call signs, and we've got people who have passed away and obviously left the hobby. So we don't really know what that leaves us with. And then we've got the people who have left the hobby. So there's registered call signs to people who aren't a part of the hobby anymore. So what causes people to leave the hobby? Obviously circumstances change, people move away, people have other commitments, and they leave the hobby behind. Amateur radio for some people isn't a full-time hobby. Some people are really committed to the hobby, other people take it here and there. I was licensed in 2004 at the age of 16, and I was on the radio all the time for probably the first 3 years of being licensed, and then I passed my driving test, left college and got a job, got into my first sort of long-term serious relationship with a girl, and left the hobby behind completely and never even thought about it until 2013. I was looking through the attic at my parents' house and found my old radio and decided to get it back out, and then slowly entered back into the hobby. So when I actually returned to radio, I was shocked that in the few years, that the short period of time that I'd been off the air, how things had changed in such a short space of time. Repeaters were a lot quieter, so I used to go on nets every night on local repeaters and on simplex, and these nets were gone, these people were gone and weren't on the air anymore, and there was not really any silent keys. It was people that weren't interested in the hobby, and you've got to ask why that is. Did the 3-tier licensing introduction in 2002 change things for people? I know there's quite a divide in the amateur radio community around this topic, but did foundation, intermediate and full license tiering change things for people? Was there a bitterness, and it sounds quite cliche when we talk about this in amateur radio, but was there a bitterness from full license holders? Now people could get onto the air really easily with a small test, rather than doing 2 city and guilds for your license. Was it the introduction to the market of black box type radios from the main manufacturers in the early 80s that changed things for people? Suddenly there was no need for homebrew equipment. You could buy these things ready-made, plug them into a power supply and get going. And the homebrew side of things and building custom equipment was quite appealing to a lot of amateurs back then. And we have to ask, did that change things for a lot of people? People also move away from areas, and then they encounter issues with planning, with neighbours around noise, interference and aerials on roofs. That drives people away from the hobby. And then also the introduction of digital modes. When I came back to radio in 2013, I'd never heard of D-Star, and all of a sudden it was all over the place. You've got Yaesu's Fusion, and you've got Motorola's DMR, which is now flooding the hobby and creating a massive avenue for other people to go down. These digital modes, along with internet linking, now allow amateurs, M3 holders, to buy a cheap handheld off the internet and talk around the world, eliminating the need for HF and shortwave for those people. And does that drive people away from the hobby? A lot of a lot of older generation amateurs that I talk to and that I'm friends with, have a resentment towards digital modes and internet linking. Echolink being another big part of that. Now you can talk around the world, and I know Echolink isn't new, but it's relatively new. You can talk around the world to anyone from your computer or from a radio hooked up to a computer. With the digital modes, you've got repeaters on DMR Fusion and on D-Star that are linked up to the internet and allow users to talk around the world and connect to a reflector really easily from a handheld. So does that drive people away from the hobby? The market's flooded nowadays with radios from Bofeng, Pofeng, WLN, Wuxun, Taitera, all these manufacturers that put cheap radios out there, and I often wonder whether this affects the hobby. Anyone can pick up a radio now and talk, and I think it's easy for people to get into the hobby and start talking without actually grasping etiquette and things like that. I don't think the course that is taught to amateurs teaches enough about etiquette and about radio operation, real life operation. It's more technical, and maybe that's something that needs to be looked at. But Bofeng and other cheap radios now allow people to get onto the radio and cause trouble, key out on repeaters, key out on nets. It's very easily done, and I hear it all the time when I'm listening. So I often wonder if that drives people away from the hobby as well. So nowadays anyone can abuse the amateur radio bands, repeaters and simplex channels quite easily, quite cheaply, and without any repercussion. The DTI and Radio Investigation Service, it was around from the 70s, 80s and 90s, is now obsolete, and Ofcom don't deal with amateur radio complaints anymore. Having experienced this firsthand, they're not interested, they don't have the resource, the time or the inclination to deal with causes of interference, dead keyers and things like that on repeaters anymore. Back decades ago, the DTI and Ofcom would take complaints seriously, and they would act upon them and publish the results, and you don't have to look far on the internet to find published results on court cases, convictions, fines, equipment seizures and anything like that. It was made public, and it was done quite often. I remember the stories on the internet of a guy in the 90s in the Redditch area that he was busted by the DTI and had his equipment seized, and he was fined £9,500 in fines and costs.
I'd never had any dealings with the DTI before. No warning, no phone calls, no letters or anything. The first contact I had, I didn't realise was the DTI. It was when a group of men came round at 11:30 one Sunday night and kicked the door down.
The company director from Redditch was fined £3,500 with £6,000 in costs. He paid up on the spot. His radio licence will now be revoked.
I was fined £1,000 on 2 counts, £500 on 3 counts, and £6,000 costs. So it's all in all cost me £9,500. It goes on pretty much all the time. I think you can just put the radio on any time and there's a... I've taken the licence off me actually, and I've been told that I'm not a fit person to hold an amateur radio licence for a period of 5 years.
And that doesn't exist anymore. There's no consequence for anybody abusing the hobby. So I often think that sometimes puts a lot of people off as well. There isn't that security in the hobby anymore, and it's sort of a free-for-all in certain areas. And you can look on YouTube. There's all sorts of videos of people abusing repeaters and things like that. There's plenty of that I've recorded that's on my channel that shows those sorts of things. So I think that's another massive issue with the hobby these days. But having said that, with all these mechanics in mind, such as internet linking, cheap radios, an easy foundation course and digital modes, there's so many mechanics to get new people into the hobby really easily, but it doesn't seem to be happening. And anyone can pick up a radio now or use a computer and talk around the world to the friends really easily and really get involved in amateur radio in a big way with little to no technical ability or experience, and just a cheap radio or cheap device. So another big part of radio is social media, From the early days, the whole point of radio was the social side of things. So whether it was amateur radio, whether it was CB, it was all social. CB probably being a better example of that, where people would get radios, put aerials up, and chat to people in the local area, make friends, chat to strangers, and meet up.
This is the Eyeball, a restaurant devoted entirely to the strange world of Citizens Band radio. Here, they even order their meals from the tables by radio.
10-4, okay.
If you want prawn salad with onion rings, you order a Home Office special with big earrings. And the CBers, or breakers as they call themselves, have weird call signs of their own.
Which one of this lot, Smokey Bear?
I'm Morning Glory.
How did you get it?
Well, I started off as Golden Lady, but everybody else had the same handle, so I decided to find something different. And I like the flowers, they're very pretty.
There are thousands of breakers in London now, and hundreds of breakers clubs. The craze took off here 2 years ago, and rapidly became big business.
Shelby, you copy Ladybird. Yeah, Ladybird, how are you? I'm fine, thank you, really fine.
Because AMCB will remain illegal, many breakers like this housewife refuse to be identified. CBers claim their ranks include policemen, doctors, firemen, even some MPs. And CBers claim they'll continue to operate on the illegal band.
OK, listen, we've got to go and do some housework, so we'll be closing this station down. Love to all the family, rubber plant and everyone else. Take care, we'll catch you soon.
Shellfish, have you heard that the bear got busted this morning? Well, we were running a sort of stretched convoy down towards London this morning at about 9 o'clock. He was behind me, we were just having a, friendly little chat. All of a sudden he tells me he's got a jam sandwich about 3 cars behind him. And the guy put the light on and pulled him over, and that was it. It was the end of the transmission. I mean, it's going to be a little bit nasty. The last time I got done, I was in the cell for 4.5 hours.
There used to be a meet in a pub not far away from me in the 80s and 90s where there was, 30 breakers from around the local area meeting up in this pub, and it's all social. And you have to wonder whether social media today, with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and all those other things, whether that has damaged the hobby. It's so much easier now. People aren't reliant on power supplies, radios and aerials. They can just pick up a smart device, a tablet, a laptop, a phone, and just talk to their friends. No problem at all. It's private, it's encrypted, it's unmonitorable by Joe Blogs, and you can talk privately and say whatever you want and talk about whatever you want without the need for radio. Has social media affected the hobby? I think it really has. I'm guilty of it as well. I've got a lot of friends on amateur radio that I only ever talk to over social media. I've got a really good friend who lives down south, who I speak to most days on social media, yet we've both got a handheld in the house where we can talk to each other over DMR really easily. Why don't we do that? I haven't got an answer for that. Maybe that's something that you guys may want to comment on. Has social media affected radio? Now, social media is thrust upon our children today that they would never even think twice about anything to do with radio. I think, going back sort of 10, 20 years, there wasn't the social media, and people, would turn to radio as a way of talking to their friends, as a way of meeting new people, and even talking to strangers. There's many groups on Facebook around amateur radio, whether it's club pages, whether it's around a specific band, a specific type of equipment, or just ham radio in general. And these groups attract thousands upon thousands of members. And it makes me wonder how many of these people actually talk on the radio when social media is such an easy, accessible avenue to go down. You've got websites and services such as Zello, TeamSpeak and Skype, which allow single or group chats really, really easily. It's encrypted and it can't be listened to, as I say, by Joe Blogs, and it's such an easy way and a portable way of talking to people in groups. There's a lot of Zello groups for radio amateurs out there, and again you have to wonder why these people are using these devices and these services rather than radio, myself being guilty of that as well. So for social media, you have got the portability, the ease of use, the there's no requirement for any technical skills to use these services, and you have to wonder whether that has killed amateur radio or whether that's caused significant damage to amateur radio on the whole. So how do we bring amateur radio back? We've got plenty of easy ways to get into the hobby now, such as the foundation license, the cheap equipment, the digital modes and the internet linking, so people can access the hobby really easily without any technical background. I think like with most hobbies, there's the sort of notion that to expand a hobby or to develop a hobby it needs new blood or young blood, and I think the entry point into amateur radio these days is sort of your 30 to 40 year old, and I don't think it's children. I think those 30 to 40 year olds have had a glimpse or past experience within radio or something similar, which makes them interested in the hobby. I think the youth of today, and it makes me sound really old, but I think kids of today don't have any exposure to radio as we know it, or to amateur radio. They're thrust straight into smart devices, tablets, phones, laptops, PlayStations and the internet, and their exposure to two-way communication is through those things rather than radio, and a lot of them will never ever have any exposure to amateur radio because they are thrust straight into the new era of communication that we find ourselves in now in 2017. So in essence, kids of today are thrust straight into two-way communication, away from radio, and it's all around internet and tablets, and these devices all talk to each other and they can't live without them. And if only we could get them to discover radio, I think there would definitely be a market there for young people to get into radio. And I know scout groups and schools and things like that try to do that, but you have to get people interested into radio. I think today, looking around YouTube and all over the internet, there's so much emphasis sort of in recent years on building things, finding out how things work, and the technical side of things for young people. With the introduction of the Raspberry Pi and things like that, it's a lot easier now, I would think, to get people aware of radio, especially young people aware of radio. I think amateur radio is perceived as a dated hobby these days, but people really need to see that secure two-way communications without being eavesdropped on now isn't just limited to cellular companies. It's available for anyone, and there's very little cost involved and very little technical experience needed. So there's definitely a lot of mechanics to drive younger people into the hobby. It is unlikely that we'll ever go back to the golden days, the heyday of amateur radio, which I myself missed out on. But I think there's definitely a market there for radio still, massively. You only have to look at what's coming out of China these days, and I think as time goes by there is the opportunity for a breed of non-amateur radio people to see the importance of radio communication networks, whether that's with a company, whether that's with a group of people, an organisation, prepping, all those things. I think there's definitely a requirement for that, and people will see that they can set up communication networks that don't require any internet, and if they actually did some research they could find what amateur radio operators have actually been doing for many years. So sustainability plays a massive part in day-to-day life nowadays. People want sustainable food, sustainable energy, and there's a massive interest in being off-grid. I'm sure many people watching this will know that UK coverage on cellular networks isn't great. There's still a lot of black areas in 2017, and I think if people had their eyes open somehow to the possibility of using a radio network or a radio system that relies on internet linking, repeaters and reflectors, they could actually talk around the world or talk with friends in different parts of the UK without any need for a mobile phone, and they'd be actually using a repeater that's free. So actually looking at amateur radio, I don't think we are in a dying hobby. I think the days of radio's heyday have gone, but I think we're entering a new era of amateur radio, and there's definitely plenty of mechanics out there to encourage new people into the radio hobby and existing amateurs back into the hobby. It's just finding a way of doing that. I definitely think amateur radio has had a slump in recent years, but as I said previously, internet linking, other devices, Raspberry Pis and all those sorts of things actually are helping to build the hobby back up. But in a different way to what we're used to. So I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. It was mainly to sort of ask for feedback. You know, I could be wrong. This is just, you know, thoughts and feelings that I have around the hobby, but I'd really want to hear what you guys think of the hobby. You know, do you think the hobby's dying? You know, do you wish you could go back to the heyday of amateur radio? How can we get back there? And is it even possible to do that? I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on this video, guys. I think it's a really great talking point. I could probably go on forever about it. But yeah, drop us a comment in the box below. Let me know what you think, your thoughts, feelings around the hobby. If you've not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. If you've liked this video, drop us a thumbs up and leave us a comment in the box below. Always appreciate hearing from you guys. And I'll leave that one there. Thanks very much for watching. Really appreciate it, and stay tuned for more. 7-3 for now.